microphone or your chat box, excuse me. We are going to wait a few more minutes before we start today's webinar. So feel free, or if you have any other comments you want to share with us, happy to have those as well. I see Sharon has joined us. So Jerry and Chelsea have joined us. Welcome.
Good afternoon. How's everybody doing?
I think well, Sharon.
Good to see you. I'm excited for today.
We're asking about superheroes. Sharon, what if you had superhero power tomorrow, what would you do with it to address housing challenges?
Oh man, I think I would want to wake up communities. We've been talking about this, wake up communities, wake up village boards and city councils to not be reactive or be okay with status quo, but to realize, man, those are 3 prime lots and we need to make sure those get in the right hands to get the right housing, not just let somebody turn that into storage or whatever. We just have experienced too much lately. So I think I would just instill that way of thinking in some minds that aren't, that's just not normally the arena they're living in.
Exactly. They're just in the moment and not thinking forward in terms of that 10,000 foot view of what would be best use for that prime piece of property in their community. So we've got quite a few people joining us here, so we will give them another moment or so.
I think too, they get so used to looking at it that they don't see a $300,000 or $400,000 house there. They see,
right.
They see Aunt Lily's old 1942 little bungalow,
Yeah.
and you don't have that vision.
Yeah. I'm curious if anybody who's joined us already maybe has experienced and found success in changing those mindsets. If you have maybe done something like that in your community, feel free to send us a chat or email us at the conclusion of today. We'd love to hear more about what you're doing to address that status quo mentality, or this is all the best we can ever do in our community. So feel free to let Sharon or myself know what's happening in your community to address those challenges. So, well, at this point, I do want to honor everyone's time and get underway. I know we will have more who are joining us here shortly, but I do want to honor our speakers' time as well as the time of everyone who is joining us. I also want to recognize our partners at the Nebraska Department of Economic Development for their financial investment and support of our HomeNE Learning Network. We do have a good number of people registered for today, and we are also sharing this on our YouTube channel. So if you or a coworker encounter difficulties with your Zoom feed, feel free to just hop on YouTube and watch from that channel as well. So let me just say welcome and good afternoon to you. If you don't already know me, I'm Lori Ferguson with South Central Economic Development District here in Holdridge. And I just want to extend a genuine and sincere thank you to all of you who are joining us here today. Excuse me. Our HomeNE Learning Network continues to expand across the state, and many of you have been faithful in making this learning network one that is meaningful and growth oriented. Sherry, if you go ahead and forward a slide for me, please. Thank you. It's our goal that you and your organization or community have already reaped benefits from your participation in this HomeNE network and the opportunities that have been provided through participating. And so those of you who are new today, or maybe have recently began participating, thank you for checking out the HomeNE Learning Network. And to those of you who have regularly participated, it's kind of hard to believe, but this is, I think we are now at 3.5 years since we started this unique learning network. And there are many of you who have been with us from the beginning. So thank you for your continued investment and participation. So whether this is your first day or one of many days that you've joined us, you are welcomed here today. So today we have the pleasure of hearing from Candace Alder. She is from the City of Norfolk Economic Development Office, and she's going to be talking to us about the topic of strategizing for housing development. We first heard about what Norfolk and Candace and her office were doing when we were at the HomeNE gathering that was hosted in Schuyler back 2 years ago now. And so we are excited to have her join us today. So before we formally introduce Candace to you, as you listen to her presentation, be thinking about questions that you might have for her, and feel free to use the chat box to drop those questions to us. We'll be monitoring that for her and asking those questions at the conclusion of her presentation. And we also all welcome you as well to open your microphone and ask her those questions during the Q&A time. So before we begin, what do you want to know about her topic? And those questions are on your screen as well as in your chat box. So feel free to answer those questions as we begin. So HomeNE is a learning network, and we learn best when we interact and engage with each other. So please share with us your thoughts today. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Sharon Heffley. She is the Executive Director here at South Central Economic Development District, and she will be introducing us to Candace.
Right. Good afternoon. Welcome to the July edition of HomeNE 2021. South Central Economic Development District is really pleased to serve as the lead agent for this learning network, and we are glad that you are here. It gets kind of busy this time of year, and we appreciate those of you that are taking an hour out of your July to spend it with us. And we're excited for what you're going to hear today. Just to tell you a little bit about HomeNE, HomeNE is designed for people all across Nebraska that are seeking to successfully address local housing challenges. The purpose of HomeNE is to build a network of individuals and communities with a shared interest in assessing and addressing housing issues, to provide a safe space to discuss what's been tried, and to find motivation to take another right step, to learn from the successes and struggles of others, and to take away new ideas or see things through a new lens. And it's to inspire you, and in turn help you inspire your tribe, because what you do in your community is truly valuable. I'm excited today that we are joined by Candace Alder of the City of Norfolk Economic Development Office. Like Lori said, it's been a couple years since we've been hearing about this, and it took some tracing down to find out who the right person was that had the right information, but we're excited to bring this to you. And I've already been giving people a little sneak peek and encouraging them to scale it to what's appropriate for their community. Candace serves as the economic developer for the City of Norfolk and the Norfolk Area Economic Development Council. She was originally hired by the city as a property coordinator in September of 2013, was promoted to the Economic Development Coordinator in 2016, and advanced to Economic Developer in 2018. Candace plays an integral role in business and industry recruitment, retention, and expansion efforts for Madison County. She's the Economic Development Lead for the Norfolk Now Community Marketing Initiative, and she's on the advisory board for the Connecting Young Professionals Group. Candace is a member of the Northeast Nebraska Growing Together Initiative, the Northeast Nebraska Development Network, and the Greater Norfolk Economic Development Foundation, the Nebraska Economic Developers Association, and the National Rural Economic Developers Association. She's the 2018 graduate of the University of Oklahoma's Economic Development Institute. She holds an Associate of Applied Science degree in graphic design, as well as an Associate of Arts degree in behavioral science. Before coming to the City of Norfolk, she worked for the Northeast Nebraska Economic Development District. So Candace, welcome to the HomeNE Network.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you, Sherry and Lori, for all that you guys did to help prepare for this and for inviting me. I know the work that happens within the economic development districts within Nebraska, and loved my time at the Northeast Nebraska Economic Development District. So we appreciate all the work that your team does to help move the state forward. And I thank you for inviting me to visit with you today and address your group. My apologies. Originally, Andy Colvin was going to join me. He's our Economic Development Director and City Administrator here at the City of Norfolk, and he certainly played a large role in the success that we're seeing here in Norfolk. But due to scheduling conflicts, he was not able to present. So you get the fair version of the duo. So I hope that's okay. But yeah, I'm excited to take you through our journey in Norfolk from when I started at the city in 2013. And so I'm kind of going to go through the history and the preparatory work that we did and the studies that we conducted, the findings that we had, and some of the strategies that we took on to address the issues that we were dealing with here in Norfolk. So when I started in 2013, housing was an issue, and as everyone in the state knows, that then in turn impacts workforce. And so our economic development office was hearing from businesses through our business visits that they just could not hire people. They would hire someone and they would get them here for a visit and they couldn't find a house. And we really started taking a closer look and inserting our office into that process after multiple accounts from the business community came forward. And through that, we started what we started with in Norfolk was we called it the Norfolk Area Housing Task Force, and it consisted of major employers, realtors, local developers, economic development chamber, the Home Builders Association. We tried to pull in a diverse mix of people within the community that were engaged in housing, and to try to gather different perspectives to see if we could identify one area that maybe was the cause of concern. And what we found was actually the opposite. It was all across the board. All different types of housing were lacking within the community, and there was a number of reasons why we learned housing wasn't happening. And so as we moved through that process, at that time, unemployment was at 2.4%, and we had 900 open jobs. And that's very similar to what we're dealing with right now. Here in Nebraska, we still have very, very low unemployment. We have lots of jobs. We hear from our employers all the time. I just came from a meeting at noon, and that was the topic, that they want to grow and they want to expand, and they cannot hire enough people. And so housing is such an important component to that, because people need a place to live if you're going to attract them to the community. And so our office really started digging in. And when I was hired on, I was the property coordinator for the economic development team. And so I got to play a big role in that due diligence work that we did to try to prep for it. And I'll get to that a little bit later, but with our prior studies, the Housing Task Force report, we had identified that there had already been a housing study done in 2011. And through that housing study, they said that we needed 87 new units per year. And so if you take a look at this chart in front of you, you can see that this is the city of Norfolk. This is dwelling units that were constructed within the community, and with a housing study that said we had a need for 87 units per year. You can see that when we started, we were already behind. We had not seen a lot of new development. I think the last apartment complex had been developed in the 90s, late 90s, mid to late 90s. And so it was just hard. We were already behind when we started, and that's probably how a lot of communities are feeling right now. It is a challenge right now. And so after we did the Housing Task Force report, we really formalized it, worked alongside our housing agency. There's a lot of partners that need to come together to successfully address a problem as complex as housing development and the need to attract housing development to the community. And we're very fortunate to have a lot of partners. And our housing agency here in Norfolk, they worked alongside us. They commissioned a housing study, and that showed that was completed in, let's see, 2016, I think is when our updated housing study was completed. And that called for 762 new units needed by 2021. And then after that, we did a countywide housing study as well. And I think that was completed in 2019. And that called for, let's see, 758 units throughout the county by 2024. So we kind of had some benchmarks to reach for. And I would encourage you all, if you don't have an updated housing study for your community, that's a really important piece when you are going out to address developers and talk to them about the need that you have within your community. It really helps to substantiate that you've done your due diligence. And so those numbers were very important for us to have. It talks about what your community can support. And so it gives the developers that confidence that they can come in and be successful within your community. So those are some of the findings that we had. So we had some benchmarks to reach for, and that's important when you're measuring your success. Beyond that, we started some, beyond the housing study, we did some in-house due diligence. And is Lori or Sherry controlling my screen? Sherry, will you scroll up to the apartment overview? Yeah, that's great. And so some of the things that aren't shown in a housing study are some of the legwork that you could do on your own just to gauge what kind of short-term rental opportunities you have. A lot of times when you're trying to attract someone to move to your community, they're not ready to buy or build a home. And so you need some in-between housing for them. And we really found that through our housing study, like the Norfolk Housing Study, of those 762 units needed, 318 of those were defined as needing to be rental units. And so some of the legwork that we did, and I brought up my apartment overview. So this was just, we made a list of the apartments that were in Norfolk, and we looked at what are they renting for, and what kind of units do they have? What kind of amenities do they have? And then we called them and asked about their vacancies. And if you scroll through some of these, you're going to see no vacancies, waiting list. You can go ahead and scroll through some of them, Sherry, and just kind of pause it. Here, no vacancies, 8 to 10 people on waiting list. Gathering all of this information is so important as you're preparing to talk to a developer, because it again demonstrates that need that these apartment complexes have waiting lists. There's people just, very eager to get into the apartments. So that was one piece of the due diligence that we did. We took testimonials from people who had moved to the community or the county. We had some in Battle Creek, one of the communities just outside of Norfolk, and we interviewed some people who had tried to move into that community and documented just their personal experiences with trying to move into the area from an outside community and the struggles that they had with finding housing for their family. And really finding quality housing in some cases for their family. Those testimonials were great. And I know that's not a concrete stat that you can lean on, but man, those make for great stories when you're talking to those developers and they understand what those people are experiencing on the ground. And it's all about reassuring them that they're going to be able to not lose money in your community, because that's what I mean. A housing developer, they need to know that that's their job. That's what they're looking to do. They want to develop homes, but they also need to make a profit. And so it's important to reassure them. We also got business testimonials, especially from some of our largest employers. If you want to scroll through the apartment, we have, and go to that land map. Okay, some of the other in-house due diligence that we did was we started really zeroing in on areas of land that maybe held housing potential. And fortunately, we were going through our comprehensive planning process here at the city. And this in particular was very helpful. We started working alongside other staff here in the city. And we have a great staff here at the city of Norfolk. Our community planner, Val, assisted with this a lot. Through that comprehensive planning process, we're able to identify areas of the community that were maybe more ideally suited for housing development. So earlier at the beginning of when we were talking about superpowers in the conversation, there was a comment for communities to recognize those lots that held that housing potential. And that's so important to know that, especially as an economic developer or as a community leader, to know, which lots do hold the most potential for housing, specifically in this case, when you're trying to attract housing. If you want to pull up the developer guide, we'll kind of scroll through that to show some of the information that we gathered. We really wanted to make sure that when a developer came, we had as much information prepared as possible. And so we had done an industrial site identification study a number of years ago. And I bring that up to liken it to this process, because what that industrial site identification study did for me is it took, I think, 10 sites within Madison County, and it gave me the opportunities of the site. It gave me the challenges of the site. It really spelled out where each site was in order for success. And so we took that same model and we kind of developed what communicating information, and you can pull that back up and you can start scrolling through it. Having that information and being able to communicate that with any developer is just so vital to the process. And so then they know that when they look at the different sites that you're presenting to them, they know where infrastructure is. What kind of growth you're seeing. You know how many acres you're working with. Communicating challenges is important. They're things that they're going to have to overcome. And I know sometimes we don't want to talk about the challenges, but on the other side of that, if you don't address them, will those areas ever be developed within your community? So we had some areas that you can, once you scroll through, Sherry, as we're talking, we had some areas that maybe had some drainage issues, but the city had a plan for those drainage issues. And so we were able to say, hey, this is this area that might hold some potential. There are some drainage issues over here. Here's what we're doing as a city to help address that. And if they know that you're going to be a partner and working through that, I think it gives them more confidence to come alongside you You can see some of that, like floodplain. We tried to communicate what the existing zoning was, which areas would need to be rezoned. And on this particular parcel, there's a guide wire that was interrupting the space. We tried to communicate areas that had been blighted and been declared blighted and substandard, so they knew that they would be potential areas to make a case for tax increment financing if that was something that they needed. You can keep going. So once we had this developed and we were armed with information, we did call on property owners to try to gauge, what are your plans for your land? And I think that's an important part of the conversation too. Some of the property owners that we initially talked to had no interest whatsoever in having their house developed. And this one, why don't you stop on this one and go back up? Yeah, this is a good one to stop on and just kind of pause. Yeah, some property owners had no interest in seeing their land developed. And so we moved on, and we knew that maybe bookmark those and wait them out, but we'll see in the future if those come to fruition. This particular parcel, we were working with the property owner. They had a desire to see this built out for housing. Paul McIntosh was the property owner. He's since passed on, but he was a real champion of economic development here in Norfolk, and we miss him dearly. But Paul brought some developers to the table, and he brought them all into the room one day and was kind of like, I'm selling this and who wants it? And it was an interesting process because we weren't sure as a city kind of what he had planned or had up his sleeve. But in the end, a group came to the table, and they're now developing Legacy Bend here. And Legacy Bend Housing Development is going to be a beautiful development. And this was one area where there was some drainage issues that the city had to address. And I believe, don't quote me on it, through the use of tax increment financing, the city also used a portion of that incremental increase to address the drainage issues that were happening, not only as a result of this area being developed, but really the drainage for the whole area. So you can see in the challenges that those potential drainage issues, but you can also see housing within 500 feet of the top of the flood control cannot have basements. So clearly communicating all of that ahead of time was great. And the developers really seemed to appreciate that. We heard a lot about word of mouth was how we found our developers, looking at other projects that were happening in other communities across the state and really in other states too, and invited them to come to Norfolk, invited them to see what we had going on, talking about our housing study, talking about the land that we had available and the property owners that were willing to engage, and really asking them if we come do business here in Norfolk. Andy Colvin came on staff in I think 2016, and he really led that charge. And I think he did a great job at engaging those developers, getting them here in town. And we really worked hard to sell the area. And we have had some success, and we're very, very grateful for that. Let's see, since beginning our efforts, let's see, I had to write out some stats for you guys. But since beginning our efforts, we have 1,283 housing units pre-platted for development. This includes all phases, so they're not being, holes aren't being, or forms aren't being poured right now, and footings aren't being poured right now, but we have those in the queue and planned out for developers to put them into motion as the market demands. And what we're hearing in Norfolk is that the market is certainly in demand. Housing apartment complexes are filling up as soon as they're open. I mean, they're opening full. Housing, single family homes in Legacy Bend, for example, what's in front of you, are putting units up as we speak. We did have a pause. COVID was an interrupter in our housing development efforts. And I think everyone can probably commiserate with the lack of materials that we saw across the country and across the state, those workforce challenges that are impacted by the lack of housing are also impacting our ability to put up housing. Subcontractors are in high demand here in Norfolk. And so I think we're working hard towards addressing the housing issues. There's still, if you want to keep scrolling, we have a couple other developments. That this one came to fruition that's in front of you right now, and you can go pretty quickly. When I go through that one, this one did not get developed. This is Norpark. Norpark's been a great success story. That parcel was owned by the Greater Norfolk Economic Development Foundation, and they have historically bought and sold land for economic development purposes. And we really identified a portion of this property as a great spot for housing, and Neighbor Works came to the table. They've done a great job. They're working alongside a developer by the name of Granville, and beautiful, beautiful subdivision we've seen built out. Since 2018, we've had 628 new housing units built within the community, and we have 108 currently under construction. We are really concentrating heavily on our downtown area right now. We're working in collaboration with Wayne State College through our Growing Together initiative, and they are working hard to deliver students that will spend their senior year living and working in Norfolk, and they will specifically be living in downtown Norfolk. We're really trying to create some density so they encounter one another, so young people are running into one another and forming relationships here in the community, and friendships, and really making a link with our area, so they have those relationships in place and decide to stay. Hopefully that's the goal. But Wayne State College has put out an RFP to ask for by 2023 30 beds that they will cost share with on by 2024 45 beds, and by 2025 they hope to have 75 beds that they're working alongside students and property owners to place students in. And so we're continuing to work hard to address the situation. I don't see it stopping anytime soon. Houses, as soon as they go on the market here in Norfolk, are snatched up. So it's been very interesting from an economic development standpoint. We couldn't do it without our partners in the field. Every department here at the city plays a role, from finance, who works with developers that bring forward redevelopment plans with the hope of getting tax increment financing to help build out their infrastructure, to our public works department, who really works alongside us to help communicate where that water and sewer is, and our partners in the field with places like Northeast Nebraska Economic Development District, who has the new construction programs, who has the owner occupied rehabilitation programs, NeighborWorks, MPPD. I mean, it's all about partners, and state of Nebraska has funds that they can bring to the table on certain projects. So I would just encourage everybody to really lean on your partners and have those conversations, so you know all the tools that you have to use for your efforts. So that's kind of all I had.
Sure. Thank you, Candace. Yeah, we've got some questions for you in the chat box. So as people are thinking and formulating their other questions, you've mentioned a housing study, and I think that's been answered by some of our participants, but who did the housing study that you mentioned?
Hannah Keelan did our housing study.
Okay. And did a foundation pay for that or help pay for that? Was it grant funded? Tell me how that was paid for.
That was our housing department facilitated that housing study, and I think they cost shared that with a grant through NIFA, but I'm not positive, Lori.
Okay, that's fine. And NIFA does have housing grants or housing study grants that they will cost share. I don't have that information in front of me. I know somebody's probably looking it up as we speak. So there are certain times during the year that they will accept study applications. So, and sometimes you can combine that with another plan in your community too. So talk to me just a little bit about scaling this information. How big is Norfolk population wise?
Population, we're at 24,000.
Okay. So talk to me a little bit about utilizing the same developer's guide, which by the way, Candace and Jen have graciously agreed to let us share that with our attendees today. So you can look through that at your leisure, the information that was provided on screen. How can that be scaled into a smaller community? What 2 or 3 steps must they do to make that accessible and useful in their community?
Sure. We were very fortunate to have an in-house team that we could lean on to gather a lot of that information for infrastructure. I would say within the smaller communities, if you don't have a team in place that can help you identify, where your water is, where your sewer is, and what kind of capacities for growth those have, engage some of our consulting firms, like, I don't want to name drop, but Olson and JEO and RDG. They do a great job at coming alongside communities and helping them with those technical questions. And that's, I think don't be afraid to bring those experts to your project, because they really do add a lot to that conversation, and those developers need to know exactly what they're dealing with. And don't be afraid. And when I say developer, don't only think of big developers. I mean, we were also engaging our local builders in the process, and don't discount the importance of one house or 2 houses or 3 houses. And even those, we call them flippers, but people who will flip homes and take and renew those maybe rundown homes within your community. It's just, I know that it's very hard out there right now. Subcontractors are in high demand, and I think if you have a builder in your community, they are probably building homes for people right now. And so we probably need to work closely with our community colleges and making sure that we're getting as many students into those programs as possible, so they can bail us out of this issue we're having.
Sure, great. Jamie has already shared the NIFA Housing Study Grant Program link in the chat box. So if any of you are looking for that information, Jamie has provided that link. Tish mentioned that you stated the city had done some work on the drainage for a flood zone. Does this have any impact on insurance coverage or possible need for NEMA money if another flood disaster were to happen? Did the flood zone get rezoned for residential use?
We, to my knowledge, did not build in any flood zones. There was drainage issues with a couple of our projects or a couple of our land areas. And so I think, and this is, I'm delving into public works world right now. I believe that, retention areas were developed that were built to take on the watershed in those areas.
Okay, perfect. So, and feel free if you have questions for Candace to open your microphone. I'm just going to keep asking the questions that are in front of me. But Steve is asking an economic development question, wondering what is the status of the proposed pipe manufacturing facility?
No status.
Okay.
The land's for sale.
Okay, so I will let that conversation take place outside of this if there's other information that you'd like to share with him. So, so what questions do you have for Candace this afternoon?
Don't know that mine is for Candace. Mine is for the other participants. And that is, how can you take this information and do something in your community? Anybody have thoughts on that? I have been taking it to our smaller communities and saying, you need to scale this down to your size. Make this a list of all of your infill lots. Note, what are the setbacks? What are the hurdles? Do you have to get some variances? What's the largest house you could build? And just take this whole concept and use it to develop those vacant lots that already have infrastructure there. I think what they did was absolutely brilliant. And I think we could do this and entice our investment clubs or our contractors or some of your big employers around here. It's the farmers or feedlots that have several employees. They can't find places for them to live, that I think they would say, oh, I hadn't thought about this. Yeah, I can bring something into this lot. So I'm excited about what might happen.
Yeah, I like the thoroughness, but yet simplicity of the developer's guide because it is replicable on smaller scales or large scales. A lot of due diligence and thought went into, okay, we need this, we need this, we need that, but it's all there on the paper for each development area. So Sean does mention that sometimes in a smaller community, a local or county foundation can do some cost sharing of housing studies. So couple questions for Candace. Were there any special incentives offered to developers other than TIF?
TIF was really the primary tool used. And because a lot of our areas did not have the infrastructure built out to them or through them, communities can use albeit $40 if they have that program in place and it's a part of their plan. And so I would encourage there's a workforce housing component to that. So that's certainly an area that you can take a look at for incentives. And then I am not terribly familiar with the LMI incentives that are in place. We have a great team over at the housing agency and they really specialize in that. And we were really looking at market housing and making sure that that was being facilitated.
Okay. Great. Patty is plugged into what the HomeNE Learning Network is about. She's asking, excuse me, a question of not only Candace, but perhaps all of us. She wants to know, is anyone else having trouble getting landowners to sell in the small towns? So we'd love to hear maybe just some feedback from some of you who are with us today. Sharon has mentioned, yes, we have communities that are landlocked. So what other issues are some of you having in your smaller communities accessing or getting land?
And Patty, I'll fill in the empty space. Good to see you or hear from you. I haven't seen you in a while. I have 140 acres of prime housing development land in the middle of Norfolk with infrastructure hitting it at 3 different angles. And the property owner does not like the city because some zoning issue 30 years ago. And so I can relate even from our size of community standpoint. And man, working through
I suppose bumping him off is completely out of the question. Just kidding.
We're getting some comments in the chat box. Sean says at least hire someone to ask or survey infill dilapidated property owners about size and willingness to sell. And Sarah shares that one way they've done it in Wood River is to purchase dilapidated housing, tear down, and then sell to builders or developers. So
that's a great strategy, because those lots already have the infrastructure to them.
Yeah. And Keith has the probably not terribly unique, but the painful situation of a landowner that wants to sell but wants over 40,000 an acre. So a little cost prohibitive. Excuse me. So what role did your developers play in this process initially? You talk about strategizing, but you're lowering their risk by providing this information for them. Were they at the table initially?
Well, we really brought them to the table when we had identified those key parcels that we wanted to direct them to, that had, that low hanging fruit, that had infrastructure that wasn't a mile away, a willing property owner, not significant problems, maybe some overcomable challenges. So we really brought them in as soon as we had that information, and they did work hard. We kind of had to sell the community alongside all of the need that you have to communicate in what we were doing as a community to invest in amenities to make it a great place to live too, because they want to see that the community is investing in itself alongside them too, I think.
Okay, great. Kind of to follow the conversation line we were just having, that there are tax consequences. Sarah shares that to encourage people to maybe discuss with their CPA a 1031 exchange. Maybe they would do that if they could understand that they could defer or eliminate some tax liability. I know just enough about a 1031 to be dangerous, so I won't go into great detail about that, but if you encounter somebody that might consider it but wants to minimize their tax obligation, check that out. Christina wants to know, are there any communities or regions exploring the creation of a land bank? So that's a question perhaps for Candace, but also for others who are with us today. And Sharon, do you have any thoughts or updates on land bank information that you would be able to share?
Well, we have communities that are interested and we would like to move forward in helping them. We just have run short on capacity to get that done. But I do think that, there's kind of some things going on in north central Nebraska and in the Panhandle. It just takes time and convening to make that happen. One of the other ways, thinking about infill lots, and you talk about getting a hold of the dilapidated housing, some of our communities have been able to do that through their nuisance abatement. When people understand, we're going to tear this down and you're going to pay the bill. And if you don't, it's going to be assessed to your parcel. They become more willing. And I'm not talking about coercion. I'm talking about necessary cleanup of houses that are really an eyesore and a safety hazard in a community. And so when they do that, then a lot of times the CRA will be poised to purchase those, and the city can help do demolition. And when you look at demolition, if you recall when we had the Nebraska Community Foundation on, community foundations can help relieve the burden of government. And so if you have a local foundation, that is an eligible use of their funds, is to help with things like demolition or cleanup of some lots. And so those are a couple good opportunities. And I think we had a situation in a community just last week where the group we were working with wanted a particular lot and the owner didn't want to sell. And he said, well, I bought that because I wanted to hang on to it. But if you would buy this one over here and then trade me, and it's just what Sarah's talking about the acres, if you can find a farmer that would say, yeah, I'll trade you. If you get me acres that meet these criteria, I'll trade you these acres next to town or in town for those acres. That speaks to that 1031. I'm like, Lori, just enough to be dangerous, but sometimes they'll do a trade when they won't outright sell something.
Candace, Sarah is asking if your new apartment developments are accepting HUD vouchers to make that housing more affordable.
I apologize. I do not know the answer to that question. On a different note, I know Norfolk is working with a couple of communities in our area to establish a land bank, but I also haven't been a part of those conversations. Gary Brett Schneider, who is the lead for our housing development agency here in Norfolk, I think he's been a part of those conversations.
Okay, great, thank you. So what other questions do you have, or talk to me maybe about what's an aha moment for you today as you listen to Candace speak? What's an action step or an aha moment that you might take away with you into the coming days? Do you have an action step as a result of listening to what's going on in Norfolk?
I think the only thing that I would say is the need to make sure that we're involving as many people as we can from the community. I was one that asked about the having trouble getting farmers on the outskirts of the communities when you want to expand to sell any of their farmland. I've been politely and not so politely turned down. And I'm not from that area, so I need to get somebody from the area, we got to keep punching. I always say, if you don't get through the first way, you got to keep punching, keep trying. But getting more people involved, I think, is probably the most important thing that I need to do.
Okay, super. Thank you, Patty.
Sometimes our question in a community on a project is, who has favor with that person or that owner? Who has favor that can talk to them? Yeah, it's sometimes if you're the outsider, it's not you, but it might be a nephew, it might be a former neighbor, who knows? But involving people and finding out who will they listen to, who do they respect, makes a big difference.
I'm curious to know if anybody is already mapping out their own housing development guide as we speak today. Are you already having thoughts or areas of your community that coming to mind that you're scribbling on a notebook or a piece of paper that you can put into a guide somewhere. So
Hi, this is
Probably in everybody's head. Hi, Roger.
hi. Roger Nattercoat, NeighborWorks Northeast Nebraska, and as a developer here in Norfolk, worked very closely with Candace and Andy, the city administrator, and the whole staff at the city, and it definitely helps move developments along. As Candace alluded to, we're in the middle of a development here in Norfolk called Norpark, and it's a combination of single family, detached homes, townhomes, triplexes that are for rental, and then a multifamily apartment buildings. So total like 121 units on 20 acres. And it's one thing that's key in the success of a development is knowing your city, being there, and working closely with them. It's not an easy and quick task. It takes a 2-year time period typically from the initial discussions to actually seeing construction and some housing being occupied. So it doesn't happen overnight. You have to have a lot of patience and be very attentive to what the needs are of the city as far as getting through the process. We went through the tax increment financing process. So that's a lot of meetings, and it's important to be before the city council um, or the village boards or whatever your given situation is, to be there so you can address the questions that they might have about your development. And just at the time, they were both from out of town, but now one lives here in Norfolk, Kelby Herman with Progressive Builders and also Mesners. And it was helpful to our partnership since we were the local organization and we were right here and could address those questions and concerns that the city and also the citizens might have had. So going through some public hearings, I mean, there was some changes that we did make once the neighborhood did speak up, and we were open to that. So like Candace alluded to several times, it takes a lot of partnerships, whether it's just one developer or the developer brings a development team together and working with all the parties that need to be. So it's a big job, but it can be done in time. Just have to have a lot of perseverance and patience to get through the process, and it does happen. So
Sherry, I don't know if you can go back to the first slide of Candace's presentation, but I think it's a very powerful visual that can you get there? Perhaps she can't, but if you remember the very first slide we showed of Candace's presentation, it's when the graph of housing permits and how it was kind of low and it was falling behind. And then yes, thank you. The implementation and the strategizing for housing development, I'm just so impressed. This is powerful. If you can track some of this yourself in your own community, and then maybe put that alongside what Norfolk has done in recent years as a result of their strategizing and their deliberate action steps, I think that speaks volumes. So I kind of wanted to return back to that first slide. Thank you, Sherry. So Candace?
Lori, I thought of something. Sean Katsky made the comment in the comment box about at least hire someone to do the survey, go out and figure out your dilapidated. And I know that last year, the RFI interns, I think the application was due in December, and maybe that would be a good use of your city funding. If you could find a little bit of funding to pay for an RFI intern for the summer, maybe you could have somebody that would go out and at least start making that developer's guide, do the survey of your properties and know what's out there.
Right. Great idea. Thank you. Yeah, it really does take a collaborative effort of individuals and organizations and departments. So making headway one step at a time. So Candace, I just wanted to thank you for joining us. And as we begin to wrap up today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, it's been a delight. It's been a pleasure and very informative. And so thank you for that. As we begin to move to the 3 o'clock hour, we have put her information on the screen, so feel free to reach out to her. And we will also be making available the developer's guidebook to all of our attendees today, post webinar. So if you're wanting a copy of that, it is coming to your mailbox shortly, or perhaps tomorrow or next week. So, and Sharon is reminding us that we do have a Housing Stay Light tool on our website. So it's a great place to begin. So, so as we wrap up today, I do want to remind you that today's webinar will be available on our website as well as all past webinars. We were really encouraged this week. It was a very timely encouragement that an individual who routinely joins us, but when she's not able to join us, does visit our website and listens to past webinars so that she's in the loop and gets caught up on what was discussed every month. So we appreciated hearing that information and found that to be encouraging. So thank you to her. So, and I've also resurrected the Wascally Wabbit to remind you that we are always on the hunt for great housing topic ideas as well as success stories for our HomeNE webinars. So if you've got something happening in your backyard or maybe your area of the state or even outside the state, if you remember, we had Pipestone, Minnesota a year or so ago. We want to know, we want to be made aware so that we can share that with other people. So we have a great platform of sharing here through the HomeNE Learning Network. So let us know if you have an idea for a topic, a success story idea, or even a lesson learned story. So we will do the legwork if you can provide the contact information and a little bit about the story that you know. So we want to hear from you, and you can see our contact information there. So so as we wrap up today, I just wanted to remind you that next month's webinar will be Thursday, August 19th at 2 o'clock. And we have not yet been able to confirm that speaker, but once we do, we will make that information available to you. So looking forward to another wonderful webinar next month. So Candace, again, it's been our pleasure to host you and to have you join us. And I'm sorry that Andy couldn't join us, but I think it was great. So any last words that you want to share?
No, but thank you so much to your team for helping me prep for this and sharing our pre-meeting meeting. I've enjoyed getting to know your team.
Thank
you
you
so much.
It's been our pleasure, Candace. And so thank you to all of you who've joined us, and your presence is appreciated.